presenting some of the most important philosophy books according to professional philosophers in a survey done in 2004. What I'm doing is I'm going to present the work, about its context, about the author, point out some of the highlights of the work, and try and establish why it's such an important read and why read it still today. Today I'm going to be looking at Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, published in 1883, at the time with very little success, written by Friedrich Nietzsche, who was born in 1844 in Germany, died there in 1900, but his actual professional life was only until 1889, when he suffered a mental breakdown and didn't write again. Nietzsche in his early career worked as a university teacher from a very young age actually, mostly focused in the field of philology, but he had to retire early due to poor health. From that moment he started more of a nomadic life, traveling between Germany, Switzerland, Italy. Most of his works consist in collections of aphorisms, short little texts or paragraphs, but he also has a number of books consisting of more theoretical analyses or even biographical reflections. Thus Spoke Zarathustra is a difficult book because you can even wonder if it is actually considered philosophy. You may say it's not, because it's actually very rich in metaphors, it's got a lot of imagery, it's written in a more literary or even religious style, something of a divine revelation kind of work. So it's actually the most unphilosophical work by the hand of Nietzsche, and perhaps in the series that I'm doing here. On the other hand, it is also the work that, according to Nietzsche himself, as he says in Ecce Homo, is his most important work, and indeed it does contain some of the most important insights that Nietzsche's philosophy has to offer. However, to get to those, we have to distill them and interpret them from a very complex to read text, which is Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So Thus Spoke Zarathustra is written in something of a prophetic voice. The word is given by Nietzsche to his character Zarathustra, based very lightly on Zoroaster, one of the first historical prophets who existed, and who, if we want to take it as such, introduced for the first time concepts like good and evil. So what Nietzsche hopes to do with using this Zarathustra figure is to re-revolutionize for a second time these concepts of good and evil. So there is a fundamental ethical undertone with Thus Spoke Zarathustra, considered with how we are to live our lives, how we are to manage our moral judgments, and how we are to perhaps move beyond good and evil as we understand them today. So to get to the heart of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, we can pull out three central concepts, very Nietzschean concepts, to try and clarify what this book and what his work is about. And the first is the notorious concept of the Ubermensch, or the sometimes translated as Overman or Superman, or very often just left untranslated as the Ubermensch. Untranslated because this word has a specific sort of Hegelian dialectic tone to it. The prefix Über means to go beyond. There's a movement, there's a dynamic in this word that is trying to be caught. There is a movement of overcoming, of surpassing something. But an overcoming and a surpassing that also contains or preserves that which is being overcome. There's a change, a sort of improvement going on. In Zarathustra's first speech, basically at the very start of the book, Nietzsche tries and clarify what kind of development or what kind of human change he's thinking about. And he translated into three changes, three metamorphoses, all three captured in different images. The first one, he talks about a camel. Being a camel means being laden, being charged with inherited norms and values that determine us. Then the second image is that of a lion. The lion, to Nietzsche, stands for a movement of rebellion, rebelling against those norms and values that hold us down, that determine us, that limit us in who or what we would want to be. And then the third metamorphosis is that into a child. The child standing for one who is free to invent their own rules, to dance, to play with who one is. So the Ubermensch is sort of an indeterminate point to which we are aiming. In the prologue, he states, "I teach you the Overman. Human being is something that must be overcome." And he compares our state to being on a tightrope. We are walking on a tightrope between animal and Ubermensch, or Overman. The next question, of course, is development to where? Where are we trying to get to? Well, the problem is that there's no exact answer to that question, because it is actually the wrong question that we're asking. So the next concept that Nietzsche proposes and that we should look at is that of eternal recurrence. In the third part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the chapter called The Convalescent, Zarathustra is presented as the teacher of the eternal recurrence. So that is a fundamental concept, but it's also one that is hardly explained in more detail. There's at least two interesting ways we can look at this concept of eternal recurrence. On the one hand, we can look at it from an ontological point of view. So the ontological interpretation of this concept is not so much to think that everything will happen exactly as it did before. That's sort of a materialistic determinism kind of way of understanding. But rather, we could understand the eternal recurrence in Nietzsche's work as the idea that there is no fixed end to excuse any means. So there's no end, no telos, toward which everything necessarily moves. That's to say, the only fixed certainty that we have is the ontological multiplicity of the things in which we exist today. So actually what Nietzsche is trying to do here is give an ontological deconstruction of teleological metaphysics, of the idea that the ends are inscribed in the material that exists today. Another way of understanding the eternal recurrence is in an ethical way. So the ethical interpretation actually proposes that Nietzsche is making a moral appeal to us, appealing to us to take responsibility for our lives as we are living it. So the first time Nietzsche proposes his concept of eternal return, he does it in a sort of mind game, an imagine if this were the case kind of formulation. And in that way, what he's actually doing is he is appealing to us to assume everything that we do, to not have regrets. That is to say, we should intend to live our lives in such a way that we can fully embrace and confirm ourselves as we are existing. Now the third question is, what is it that we're trying to confirm in ourselves? And Nietzsche doesn't understand this as confirming our being or what we are, but rather we should confirm what we do or our becoming. And so this takes us to the third central concept in Nietzsche's work in general, and particularly in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, is that of will to power. Now the very concept of will to power has been used as the title for a collection of posthumous notes collected and published as a work by Nietzsche, and it has also been unfortunately appropriated by Nazis, by Nazi ideology, sort of combined with social Darwinism as an idea that they themselves or certain races or certain people are the powerful and should further their political agenda as they see fit. The central mistake in that appropriation is most likely that will to power in itself is neither a political nor a biological principle, and most of all, it's not a ontological principle. Rather, what it is one name that Nietzsche gives to identify an irrational multiplicity of forces propelling all life. There's a bit of Schopenhauer here. Schopenhauer was one of the teachers indirectly of Nietzsche himself, who used the concept of will to identify that force that propels the world and all that lives in it. The big difference is that Nietzsche, in contrast to Schopenhauer, seeks to confirm or affirm that will to power. So Nietzsche's point is actually to subscribe the idea that there is a driving force to constantly improve and empower ourselves. How we do that is actually measured by having a biggest impact in the world, by having an optimal flourishment. So why read Nietzsche today? First of all, he was a clairvoyant, a precursor of much of what happened in historical perspective in the 20th and 21st century. He predicted, in a way, the rise of National Socialism as well as communism. He predicted the global power struggles that would occur, and he predicted the instrumental rationality linked to powers of destruction. He also predicted the rise of nihilism as a central problem for modern society, consisting in a doubt of all values and of all truths. But it should be clear that Nietzsche himself was not a Nazi or a nihilist, actually, but he was very much concerned for these developments. On the other hand, Nietzsche also precedes or opens the way for much of contemporary philosophy. And in an interesting way, he does that to two directions. On the one hand, Nietzsche precedes what is today called continental philosophy, and continental philosophy is focusing mainly on meaning. Important questions in continental philosophy concern how to overcome metaphysics, or on the other hand also how to maintain metaphysics as a philosophical project. They are concerned with the origin, the functioning, and the meaning of existence, of values, of knowledge. But on the other hand, Nietzsche also precedes analytic philosophy, which is the exact counterpart for the continental tradition. In analytic philosophy, focus is much more placed on sense, how things are being represented or evoked. The concern for analytic philosophy is much more for the use of language in establishing knowledge or truth or morals. In analytic philosophy, we find much more the Nietzschean ideas of the importance of perspectives, of points of view, of language games. Zarathustra is a hard read. It's an acquired taste, and it's risky of being pretentious. It transgresses at various ways the limits of philosophy. It has a style that could almost be called musical. It uses metaphors and imagery, and as a result, it's a book that is hard to interpret and that requires a lot of effort to dig through. The point of that might very well be that Nietzsche is actually trying to oppose the traditional philosophical style as elaborating or describing detached systems of explanation and of coherence. So we should probably read Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra like we would most of his works, much as we would read very informative literature, taking a certain distance, reading it, appreciating it, contemplating the elements that are in it, trying to interpret them, apply them to what we know and what we think we know, return to those readings at a later time, read them again, take them in again, take our distance, interpret them, apply them, reject them, and interpret them again. So there's a constant revisitation of Nietzsche's works, much like his eternal recurrence would ask us to do.